Ever felt like your pet knows more than you do? When one woman's husband grows distant, her dog's strange behavior uncovers a chilling secret. But that's just the beginning. What she finds next will leave you speechless. Want to know the truth? Like and subscribe to uncover the mystery. My husband had been putting in so many hours at work lately that the second he stepped into the house, he would drop onto the sofa and either fall asleep right away or mumble a few words before heading straight to bed. He hardly acknowledged me. No smile, no hug, not even eye contact. At first, I kept telling myself it was just the stress from work, that he was simply exhausted, and I reminded myself how lucky I was that he came home safely every night. But as the months passed, those reasons stopped bringing me comfort. Even when he lay next to me at night, I couldn't feel any affection from him. His body was there, sure, but his spirit felt absent, cold and far away. It felt like a complete stranger was sharing my pillow. The feeling crept into me slowly and quietly. That night was no exception. He walked in, muttered, "I'm beat," collapsed on the couch, and dozed off. I looked at him, wanting to say something, but I didn't. Maybe I didn't have the strength. Maybe I was scared, afraid of what he might say, or that he'd just respond with that same distant look and empty voice. Feeling that void inside, I walked away from the living room. My feet took me to the bedroom, and I wasn't alone. Sadie, our faithful dog, followed me. She glanced up at me with those deep brown eyes like she understood everything. As my husband became more distant, Sadie seemed to cling to me more tightly. Her soft fur and quiet presence. Maybe she was the only one who helped ease the silence around me. I got into bed and turned off the light. In the dark, all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing and Sadie's gentle snores, while my husband remained on the couch. I lay there in that cold room, uncertain and alone. Then Sadie did something unusual. She jumped up on the bed. Normally, she'd curl up on the floor, but that night was different. She lay down beside me and gently placed her head on my arm. Something shifted inside me. I was so lonely that her warmth gave me a small sense of calm. As I ran my fingers through her fur, I whispered, "At least you're here." My eyes stared at the ceiling, but my mind was full of questions. Was my husband's coldness just because he was tired, or was I fooling myself? As Sadie's breathing touched my skin, the emptiness inside me seemed to shrink a bit. Still, a strange thought started to grow in me. This closeness, this comfort, was it something I should feel guilty about? I didn't know. All I knew was, in that moment, I felt slightly better. And yet, deep within, a tiny voice whispered that this comfort might have a price. I shut my eyes and tried to drift off, but the questions spinning in my mind wouldn't give me peace. Sadie moved closer as if trying to protect me. That night, those hours with her were both soothing and confusing. Was this feeling pulling me towards something deeper, or was it just something my mind made up? I couldn't say for sure, but I had a feeling that this sense of peace wouldn't stay for long. As I lay there, I thought about how this wasn't always how Sadie behaved. I remembered clearly how she used to sleep quietly on the edge of the bed, just close enough to know she was there, but not touching me. Lately, things had changed. Ever since my husband began coming home and either dropping onto the couch or barely speaking, Sadie seemed to be trying to fill the gap. At first, I thought it was just how she relaxed, but then it got odd. Some nights, she'd hop onto the bed and lie down beside me, almost like she was trying to take my husband's place. She'd silently stay near, watching me with those big eyes. Maybe I was imagining it, but this closeness grew more frequent with each day. That night, with my husband still on the couch, I returned to the bedroom. I lay down and turned off the lights, left alone with my thoughts. Sadie came in behind me. She sat on the bed for a moment, then slowly made her way up. Her actions were calm and steady. I suddenly felt warm breath near my neck, and my heart skipped a beat. I turned, surprised. It was Sadie. Her head rested gently on my shoulder, her eyes shut. At that moment, I couldn't tell if I felt relief or unease. Usually, I didn't mind her closeness. I even liked it. But that night, it felt strange, like I was crossing a line I hadn't meant to. I thought about telling her to move, but I didn't. I couldn't push her away. She felt like the only one who cared. The next morning, that strange feeling still lingered. I saw my husband drinking his coffee in the kitchen and told myself I'd try again. I walked over, lightly touched his shoulder, and said, "Good morning. How are you?" He didn't look at me. "Tired. Works a lot," he muttered before walking away. In that moment, the last bit of hope I had faded. No matter how much effort I made to reconnect, he only pulled further away. I took my coffee and sat near the window, my mind racing. Was I overanalyzing everything, or was something truly wrong? Sadie came up beside me, laid her head on my leg. I looked at her and felt like she knew something I didn't. All day, I couldn't shake the unease. My husband's coldness, Sadie's growing closeness. Something inside me felt heavy, guilty even, though I couldn't say why. Was it Sadie's being near that made me feel this way? Or was it really just my husband's absence that left such a hole? By evening, I was back in bed. Sadie didn't hesitate this time. She leapt up as soon as I lay down and curled up next to me. Her presence comforted me, but also left me puzzled. Why was she acting like this? It felt like she picked up on something I hadn't noticed yet. I shut my eyes and tried to sleep, but the same questions spun around in my head. Sadie's warm breath on my skin. Was it easing my worries or pulling me toward something I didn't understand? I didn't have answers. All I knew was this strange closeness seemed to be leading somewhere, though I had no idea where. That night, I couldn't sleep. In truth, I hadn't slept well in days. My husband's coldness and Sadie's odd behavior stayed on my mind. As I lay there in the dark, eyes fixed on the ceiling, I suddenly noticed Sadie begin to tremble. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but my eyes were wide open. Sadie was upright on the bed, stiff and alert, her eyes locked on the door. A low, tense growl came from her throat, not her usual soft purring. It chilled me to the bone. It was like she was guarding me, trying to warn me. "What's wrong, girl?" I whispered. I spoke quietly, my voice shaking, yet he didn't even glance at me, his full attention fixed on the doorway, like he was witnessing something invisible to me. I threw off the blanket and slowly sat up, my pulse racing. Sadie's strange actions filled me with worry. Maybe it's just a rodent, I tried to convince myself, hoping for a logical reason, though something in me said this wasn't ordinary. I climbed out of bed, not bothering with my slippers, and walked toward the door. Sadie kept growling but didn't budge. I placed my hand on the doorknob and paused. What if there really was something out there? What if my husband wasn't lying on the couch like I thought? These doubts circled in my head, but I couldn't just stay frozen. I took a breath and gently pushed the door open. The hallway was completely dark, with only a dim light from a faraway street lamp sneaking through the window. I squinted, trying to make out shapes, but saw nothing at first. Just as I was turning around, a movement caught my eye. A quick shadow at the far end of the corridor, swift and quiet, as though someone or something had glided by. Every inch of me went stiff, my grip on the doorknob frozen. "Who's there?" I asked, barely audible even to myself. No reply came, only silence. Sadie had gone quiet, now sitting at the bed's edge, watching me. In that moment, wild thoughts filled my head. Was someone inside the house, or was my mind deceiving me? Maybe I was just overtired and imagining things. But that shadow, it had looked so real. I thought about flipping the light switch, but I couldn't do it. I stepped into the hallway, then took another step. The floor was freezing, but the real cold was inside me. Was my husband still on the couch? Should I check or go back and lock the door? Sadie's eyes were still locked on me, like she was trying to warn me. "What are you seeing, Sadie?" I whispered, but she only tilted her head. Right then, a feeling took hold. Something was seriously off. My husband's constant fatigue, Sadie's unusual behavior, and now this shadow, they had to be linked. But I didn't know how. Fear and curiosity churned inside me. I stood in the hallway for a bit longer, ears tuned in. The silence wasn't soothing. It was eerie. I couldn't decide whether to sneak back into the room or tiptoe toward my husband. Then Sadie shifted again, closer to the bed's edge, staring at the door like she was expecting something. That's when it hit me. There was something more to my husband's unending tiredness, something I couldn't ignore anymore. But what was it? I had no clue. In the darkness, I stood still, heart pounding like a drum, unsure of what would come next. I honestly don't know how I made it through that night. Sadie didn't close her eyes for a second, remaining perched on the bed's edge, her gaze never leaving the door. At times she took deep, long sniffs, like she caught a scent, and that only made my nerves worse. She'd always seemed like a regular dog, someone I could sleep beside. But that night wasn't ordinary. Maybe she sensed something before I did, like she was trying to say something. "What is it, Sadie?" I murmured into the blackness, and again she turned her head to me. There was something different in her look, like she understood, maybe even warning me. I tried to rest, but every time I shut my eyes, I saw that shadow again. Was my husband really where he said he'd be? Should I go check? But I couldn't bring myself to move. I yanked the blanket to my chin and tried to take comfort in Sadie's presence. If she hadn't been there, I might have truly lost my grip. The next morning, I woke with a pulsing headache. My husband had already left, mumbling a rushed, "I'm late," on his way out. The house felt heavier without him. the silence nearly crushing. It was just Sadie and me again. I poured myself some coffee and sat at the window, still thinking about the night before. Suddenly, Sadie bolted toward the door. What now? I thought, trailing after her. This time, she didn't stop. She scratched at the door, eager to go outside. Her behavior was not like usual. She seemed to be following something. I opened the door, and she shot into the yard like a dart. I followed her, the cold air stinging my cheeks, though the chill within was worse. Sadie began circling my husband's car, nose to the ground, like she'd discovered something. By the time I reached the vehicle, she had paused and looked up at me. "What is it, girl? What do you smell?" I asked shakily, crouching down. I narrowed my eyes under the car and spotted a small, shiny object near the front right wheel. I picked it up. It was cold and heavier than I expected. This wasn't our house key. It looked almost normal, if not for the bit of red string attached to it, something I'd never seen before. My pulse quickened. "What does this open?" I muttered. Sadie kept her gaze on the car. I froze, thoughts tumbling around. Where did this key come from? Had my husband dropped it, or was it someone else's? A restless voice inside pushed me. It's time to investigate. With unsteady hands, I reached for the trunk. As I lifted the lid, I held my breath, bracing for whatever I was about to find. But nothing could have prepared me. My eyes widened in shock. Something was inside, though it took a few seconds for my mind to understand. Sadie stood next to me, sniffing toward the open trunk. Inside me, a storm was building. This went far beyond tiredness. It hinted at something deeper, something I couldn't yet name. The truth was staring at me, but the puzzle pieces weren't in place. My heart beat like thunder in my chest. The key still clutched tight in my palm. Sadie looked up at me again, her eyes urging me forward. I couldn't bring myself to touch what was in there, so I just looked. I knew, without question, that something was horribly wrong, and it tied back to my husband. But what I didn't know was just how deep it went, or what kind of truth I was about to uncover. I had no clue, but deep inside, I felt like something had just started. And this beginning seemed to carry the weight of something ending. When I lifted the trunk lid, what I saw made me freeze completely. At first, I couldn't grasp what I was staring at. I stood motionless. Sadie stood beside me, her nose pointing at the open trunk, like she was just as shocked. Slowly, my vision adjusted, and I saw it clearly. Inside my husband's car trunk lay a woman's coat. It was gray, smooth to the touch, and stylish, the type I'd never wear. Right next to it was a pair of shiny black heels, elegant and dainty. They weren't mine. That was obvious, but what hit me hardest was the scrap of paper barely sticking out of the coat's pocket. My shaking hand reached out and tugged it free. It was a small note. My fingers were trembling so badly I dropped it more than once before I managed to open it. When I finally read the message, my world cracked apart. "Don't forget last night. Let's see each other again soon." I felt the tears pushing up, but not even a single drop fell. My throat was blocked with words I couldn't say. The handwriting was graceful and clear. A woman's, without a doubt. The thing my husband had been hiding from me now stared me straight in the face. He had fooled me. That coat, those shoes, that paper. They shouted the truth behind his lies and excuses about being worn out. But what struck me most was the date, just 2 days earlier, 2 days before, when he came home and collapsed onto the couch without even looking at me. Was that when it happened? Was he spending those hours in someone else's arms? My stomach burned, but at the same time, I was frozen. My hand still gripped the paper. My eyes stayed locked on the words. Sadie rested beside me, her head in my lap, and I stared into her eyes, needing comfort. "You knew, didn't you?" I whispered. Her recent behavior, the way she curled beside me at night, the growling at the door, all of it made sense now. She had sensed something wrong long before I did. I thought he was simply overworked, but Sadie had known the truth. Her silent loyalty had been trying to shield me, though she couldn't block the reality from reaching me. Now that truth belonged to me, and it crushed my chest. I stayed there, unsure what step to take next. I reached for the coat again, running my fingers across the material. A gentle scent drifted up, sweet, unfamiliar, not mine. My thoughts went wild, picturing who she might be, how she looked, what my husband had told her. Had he even mentioned me, or was I invisible to him now? The more I wondered, the more the fire in me grew. I read the message again, the words stabbing deep. Don't forget last night. What had they done? Where had they gone? Why hadn't I seen even a hint of guilt on his face when he walked in? Was lying that simple for him? Still stuck in place, I picked up the coat again. The scent clung, soft and foreign. Nothing like what I ever used. My mind filled with questions about her. What she was like, how my husband treated her, if he ever brought up my name. Or was I erased from his world entirely? My thoughts swirled, and my anger grew hotter. I stared at the note again, and each sentence cut deeper. Don't forget last night. What did they do together? Where were they? Why hadn't I noticed any sign? Was it that easy for him to hide everything? Sadie nudged me again, as if trying to pull me back, but I couldn't move on. I had to face what was real. My husband had been with another woman. His lazy apologies and distant looks were nothing more than a mask, and I had fallen for it. My eyes were soaked, but the tears didn't fall. My fury outmatched the sorrow. I didn't know what I should do. Should I go face him with this evidence, or dig deeper to find everything out? Sadie's eyes said more was waiting to be found. The coat, the shoes, the paper. Was this just the beginning? I closed the trunk, but the storm inside me still raged. I shoved the key into my pocket, still holding onto the note and coat, standing there in the yard as the wind brushed across my face. But I felt nothing. What would my husband say when he walked in? Would he bother to explain or come up with more lies? I didn't know. I only knew that this mystery had already changed me. But how would it shape me now? Would it fuel rage or something else? Sadie still looked at me, and in that second, I knew this wasn't over. There was more I needed to uncover, and I was ready to search. But where would I begin? One morning, I woke up, my eyes heavy, trying to pull my thoughts together, but I felt a strange restlessness deep inside. Even when I felt rested, something felt missing. Every morning, the urge kept getting stronger. I had to go to the stable. I didn't know why, but the feeling kept pulling me there. It wasn't a physical craving at first. I didn't understand it, but with every new sunrise, the feeling got stronger, like something invisible was drawing me in. Yes, it may have sounded strange, but I knew it was real, and I couldn't fight it. The family farm had always felt like a safe place, but something about that morning was different. As I stepped toward the stable, the air felt colder. Everything looked normal, but something wasn't right. I pushed the door open, and the old wood groaned as I entered. The smell hit me instantly, a thick mix of hay, livestock, and age. The usual scents of horses and cows hung heavy in the air, but this time they felt stronger, like they were pulling me in deeper. I turned my head, and that's when I saw it. A horse I hadn't noticed before. Or maybe I had. It was hard to tell. But now the horse was clearly watching me. My body began to tremble. Its eyes seemed to speak, though I couldn't understand what they were trying to say. There was a strange stirring in me, a confusing wave of emotions. I couldn't name the feeling exactly. Part attraction, part something more. Maybe this was the start of discovering a truth I'd ignored for a long time. My body moved toward that feeling. As I took slow steps forward, the horse's gaze seemed to deepen, like it saw something inside me. I tried to convince myself everything was normal, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I paused. What was I doing? What was I after? This feeling, this strange pull, was tied to the horse in a way I couldn't explain. At some point, I was focused only on the horse, its presence filling the entire space. It looked at me as if it had something urgent to say. I felt something shift inside me, a spreading heat, a rush of energy, and a question surfaced. Why was I experiencing this so intensely? What was it about this stable, about this horse, that stirred something deeper than I could explain? The emotion wasn't physical. It felt like an inner pull, an awakening of a part of myself I hadn't known existed, as though the stable was quietly revealing a piece of my history. And then there was that look. It didn't just glance at me, it seemed to peer through me, reaching into my past. It felt like a summons. An echo answered. I stepped forward, my heartbeat quickening. A voice in my mind cautioned me to stop, to turn back, that it wasn't safe. But I didn't listen. My body moved on its own, brushing aside the illusion that everything was ordinary. Then, out of the silence within, something else rose up. A stirring emotion, a longing, a force. But I still couldn't make sense of it. Each second spent in the stable seemed to stir something hidden. At first, it was only a strange attraction, but gradually I became aware that something important was missing. That first sense I felt had actually been an invitation, a signal to uncover something far older than me. It was like every beam, every shadow in that place was whispering a story, but what story? The fragments of a presence I didn't recognize, the marks of someone who had once stood where I now stood, like a presence from the past reaching through time. Even with open eyes, it felt like something unseen was moving before me. Hazy impressions and half-forgotten thoughts floated by like echoes of a forgotten ghost. A piece of the past, once lost, long buried in darkness, and now beyond recall. And yet I knew it was there, hidden just out of reach. The past cast its shadow toward me, drawing closer as I explored deeper into the stable. Then one day, something caught my attention. An old trunk tucked into a far corner, concealed beneath forgotten objects, as if untouched for decades. I moved to it quickly and examined the aged, rusted lock. It resisted, but eventually I managed to force it open. Inside, I found only darkness and dust. The chest contained fragile yellow documents and one large, faded envelope. The writing on it was so worn that I could barely read it. I sorted through the papers, each one seeming to murmur something, though the meaning slipped away. One sheet had faint lines scrawled on the back, but none of the words made sense to me. There were numbers and dates, like codes. Everything felt like it belonged to me, yet none of it was familiar. A tension started to build within me, as if I was nearing a truth I couldn't yet name. Among the papers, an old key stood out. It seemed important, perhaps the key to something greater. It felt like everything in the stable carried meaning, just waiting for me to unlock it. The chest, the documents, the key, they all seemed to point to one truth. This is where it all began. But what exactly began? And who was the person behind all this? My mind spun with questions that wouldn't let me rest. Suddenly, it was as if the haze in my mind cleared, and flickers of memory returned. But how much could I truly remember? There was a great emptiness inside, a hole that had always been there. Why had this all started? I must have wandered deep into thought, because suddenly I felt as though I was no longer in the stable, but outside my home, standing alone in a shadowy forest. As I followed the thread of the past, every clue brought with it a shard of forgotten time. But the one thing I needed most was to understand what the key unlocked. To uncover the truth behind the mystery, I had to find something else within that chest. But what? Should I go beyond this place and search, or should I stay here, listening to the voice that might offer another path? My thoughts became tangled. I realized I might have to wait for the right moment to decide, but this time I felt that everything would change. Should I follow the voice of memory and retrieve what had been hidden? Or should I forge my own path and look to the future? That moment and the key would be hard to follow, but perhaps they would lead to more revelations, pointing to an even deeper secret. The key and the papers had only widened the emptiness that had always been with me. The questions circled endlessly, and I sensed I was closer than ever to an answer. Everything inside the trunk reflected a past cloaked in mystery. And yet, what was it exactly? I felt like I had gained so much, yet at the same time, something had been taken. All of it pushed me back toward the stable and the history it held. First, I turned to my mother. Her long-standing silence began to show signs of the hidden truths she carried. I began to ask her about the trunk, but her reaction was silence. She looked away, and the sudden tightness in her expression made it clear she didn't want to talk. What was so terrible that it had to remain unspoken? When I asked my father, he gave no real reply, just a vague comment that some things are better left in the past. Still, something inside me was starting to come apart. This wasn't some small family mystery. It was something far more serious. Then I remembered my grandmother. She had always seemed to be the root of the secrets no one wanted to acknowledge. Her tales were rich with memories of the past. Perhaps she'd been trying to bury something for years. A few days later, I went to visit her. She sat in the familiar living room of her old house. Her gaze carried the weight of decades, but she was never tired of telling the stories she had repeated over the years. I carefully introduced the topic. At first, she faltered, nervous, but then a certain glimmer lit up her eyes. "I will tell you," she said, "but it may take you down a dark path." There was pain behind her words, but she continued, "If you want things to be different, you have to hear every hidden truth." She began to recount a tale of an old romance, one linked to the stable, a love that carried the origin of our family's past. "Your great-grandfather," she explained, "was a man from long ago who once experienced a forbidden love in that very place." Her words slipped from her lips like spirits, each one weaving a somber legend. She went on, telling of a time when he fell in love with a different woman, someone from the lands near the stable. But this relationship was forbidden, clouded by disloyalty and rejection by their families. He had turned away from someone, choosing another, and the affair caused serious conflict between the families involved. No one knew exactly how it all ended, but my grandmother said that the truth had always been kept buried, something never spoken aloud. According to what my grandmother once shared, love had to be hidden, but in the end, that secret affair brought sorrow. No one really knows how the relationship concluded, yet the events that unfolded during that time left a lasting impression that still echoes today. All of a sudden, I became aware that the betrayal had left a lasting scar, and the emptiness I felt now came from the remnants of what happened long ago. That relationship wasn't merely an act of unfaithfulness, it became a sign of that era, and the roots of what I live through now were planted back then. My grandmother started to uncover more, saying that the forbidden romance carried an important truth hidden within our family line. She warned me, though, that everything comes at a cost. The past doesn't just weigh on your shoulders, it molds what lies ahead. I was left puzzled by her words. Everything seemed connected, but I couldn't make sense of it all. How did my current life tie back to long-lost events? What hidden decisions and secrets had shaped my path? It wasn't simply a family mystery. While trying to figure out who I really was, I began uncovering fragments from that vanished era, unapproved love and betrayal, pieces that seemed to seek me out as I delved deeper. When she finished speaking, my grandmother stared into the distance. She had said what she needed to, but some parts remained clouded. I didn't fully grasp what had taken place, yet I knew I had only just set out on a shadowy path. The mystery of that forbidden affair would not be easy to unravel. I had to uncover the buried past, find my own truth, and confront what it all meant. I sensed there was still more to be uncovered, and maybe it would mark the start of something new, maybe even another betrayal. Each word from my grandmother rang through my head. The weight of the hidden love in the barn, the dark echoes of our history, the facts kept from me now pressing heavily on my shoulders. I had long felt incomplete, but never realized it was tied to a betrayal buried for so long. Suddenly, I sensed that the truth about myself was about to be completely redefined. That evening, I went to my room and looked again at the letters I'd uncovered in the chest. The words began to take on fresh meaning. What had once read like a simple tale of love now whispered something deeper with every sentence. One line stuck in my mind. Everything will change once the truth is known, but some secrets must stay in the ground. I had no idea who wrote it, but a quiet fear took hold inside me. Each new piece of my family's story made me question my own identity. My relatives always emphasized how much the farm, the land, and old customs mattered. But now I saw that the base they stood on was cracked. If that betrayal had never happened, would I even be here now? Was my entire life shaped by someone else's wrong turn? A surge of anger rose in me. They'd hidden the truth from me for so long. Maybe there was a reason for the silence, but choosing to let me live under a lie, fully aware of it, how could I ever accept that? At sunrise, I made my way to the barn. That building had taken on an entirely different meaning. It felt more like a tomb holding the weight of old secrets. I began to understand why I'd always been drawn to that place. It had nothing to do with the animals. It was about an unfinished bond with what came before. The remnants of the forbidden love still clung to the very structure. Standing by the door, I drew in a deep breath, my chest pounding as I stepped inside. The low light and the scent of straw brought me back in time. The blurry images in my head became sharper. This was where the hidden love had unfolded. My gaze moved to the back of the stable. After hearing my grandmother's account, the place felt more known. For an instant, it felt like the long-gone moments were playing out right in front of me. My chest tightened. That's when I noticed it. Tucked into the corner was a gap between the wooden boards. My fingers trembling, I edged closer and peered in. Inside was an old, thick notebook, dusty and worn. Holding it, I felt the weight of the past pressed against my skin. What did these pages hide? Could there be an even deeper secret that my grandmother never revealed? The answers might lie inside, but was I ready for them? I stood there, torn between opening the book or walking away. If I read what was inside, nothing in my world would stay the same. Everything I knew about my family and myself might be rewritten, but I couldn't walk away. I inhaled deeply, opened the notebook, and started to read the first lines. As I turned the pages, time seemed frozen. The words were dense, suffocating. My breath grew shorter with every sentence, each line piling on the weight of the one before. My family's history was far more shadowed than I had ever expected. The book was a record of the forbidden affair and the deception surrounding it. Years back, my great-grandmother, always remembered as a quiet, gentle woman, had fallen in love with a man who worked here on the farm. But their love wasn't just a betrayal, it was the very reason I exist. The man we thought was her husband hadn't been the one she loved. Her real affection had bloomed and ended right here, on this land, in this very stable. But like every secret romance, it came with a price. The final pages were filled with frightened handwriting. They split us apart. They helped him get away, but I remained with my child. I could never tell him who he really was. I couldn't allow them to do to him what they did to me. If anyone ever reads this, know that I loved you. I stayed silent to keep you safe. My grip loosened, and the notebook slipped from my hands. My grandmother, the woman who raised me, loved me, and shared stories of the land, had become the last piece in a chain carrying an old secret. Now that I knew, truly understood, what had been hidden, I felt like I was releasing her. Learning that the tale of my life had been shaped by a lie ignited a strong fury inside me. But anger wouldn't be enough. Now that the truth was mine, I had a choice to make. Would I keep living in the shadow of the past or begin writing my own path? I moved slowly toward the center of the barn. This place held the weight of what had been buried, but I wouldn't let it stay underground. Kneeling, I placed my hands on the floorboards, closed my eyes, and whispered, "Is anyone there?" Of course, there was no reply, but something shifted within me. The farm was soaked in the past's mistakes, but they didn't have to shape what came next. I didn't have to keep believing the version of events I'd been told. I got to my feet, brushed off the dust. I was finally free. That night, I left for town without saying anything to my family. As I boarded the bus, I glanced back at the land one last time. I felt an unfamiliar calm. I was leaving behind the farm and its history, but for the first time I truly understood who I was. And that was enough.